In high school, I went to a renowned private school in New York City. Because my dad had a very lucrative luxury real estate firm, we lived comfortably. Despite our family's prosperity, my parents constantly instilled a feeling of humility in my brothers and myself. We realized that my dad's achievement was solely the result of hard effort. If we wanted to keep up our current standard of living as we aged, we would also need to work very hard and succeed. I felt right at home and didn't feel at all out of place because most of the students at my school were also rather well off. Julian, the driver for my family, would bring me up from school each day in a black Escalade. He arrived to the school about 30 minutes before lessons ended, making sure to claim a spot right out front before all the other parents and drivers showed there. I left my friends one day after school was out and walked out of the wrought iron school gates towards the cars parked along the curb. I was shocked to see that Julian's automobile wasn't in the front like it usually was. This wasn't very strange. He picked up my younger siblings from school before he came to fetch me up, and it was common for them to forget a lunchbox or a book and have to sprint back inside the classroom. I dug into my backpack and pulled my phone from the front flap. I intended to see if Julian had phoned me to inform me that he would be running late. I felt someone cover my mouth with their hand from behind before my fingers could even grasp my phone. Little time was left for me to yell. I was carried into an adjacent black automobile after being half pulled there. It was a high-end model that complemented the other vehicles that were parked and waiting for the students. Yet, I was in such a panic that I was unable to understand what was happening to me. Looking back, I should have at least tried to jot down the make and model. The door banged shut behind me as I entered, and the automobile backed out and started to go. And I had no idea where I was headed. My bag was pulled off of my back and put somewhere else. I've watched enough crime movies to know that they were probably turning off my cell phone to hide me from the cops. In my perspective, there had to have been 3 men in the car, if not more. There were no passenger conversations and simply outside traffic noises inside the car. Police sirens weren't audible when I listened for them. We appeared to be on the road for an extremely long time. I didn't care where we were heading, I just wanted to get there. I could at least look around and perhaps come up with an escape plan that way. I wondered whether they were trying to keep me from seeing where they were taking me and potentially listing that information against them by covering my eyes. I gradually sensed the car slowing down and turning onto what sounded like a gravel path after a few minutes had elapsed. I felt like I was being dragged out of the car when I heard the car door open. The temperature was different, and I could hear gravel crunching under my feet, so I knew I had been transported into a building. I was escorted down a long hallway and then sat in a chair. My arms and legs were bound, and my blindfold was taken off. I couldn't help but scream in pain as the duct tape covering my mouth was swiftly pulled off and dragged along my skin. In front of me were 3 incredibly menacing-looking males, dressed in full black, their bodies covered in tattoos. Behind them, others were occupied with what appeared to be complex computer equipment. The individual next to me looked at me with his arms crossed and his jet black sunglasses on. Without saying a word, he picked up a huge whiteboard from a nearby table and held it in front of me. He told me that I was to read the message written on the board. A man with a camcorder approached me while someone else adjusted a light so that my face was visible in the dim room. The red light on the camcorder indicated that it was already filming. And up until that time, I was unaware that I was being held for ransom. With a shaking voice, I began reading what was written on the whiteboard. Louder. I almost got up from my seat because of how loud the man was shouting. I kept talking as loud as I could. The men had threatened to hurt me, I told the camera, unless money was sent to a particular account number indicated on the whiteboard. I couldn't understand why this was taking place. As soon as I completed reading the message, the camera was turned off and given to one of the males using one of the computers. After removing the memory chip, the man plugged the computer with it. I watched the television as my horrified face appeared. Before I could see what exactly the man meant to do with the tape, two of the men who had been in the car with me when I was abducted untied me from my chair and hauled me to my feet. Without saying a word, they dragged me down the hallway and tossed me into a small room before locking the door behind me. I wiped my tears away and tried to take in my surroundings. There was no bed, only a little wool blanket in the corner of the room. There was also what appeared to be moldy bread, a pail of water, and a plastic cup. And there were no lights in the room, and nobody came to see how I was doing. I worried that I wouldn't be permitted to leave to use the restroom, so I only drank a tiny bit of water, just enough to moisten my lips. When night fell, I was no longer able to hold back my hunger and decided to try part of the bread while eliminating the stale pieces. Whenever it got any darker, I knew I wouldn't even be able to tell what I was eating. Eventually, the sun went down, and I would say it was probably around 8 p.m. There were no clocks in the room, so I had no idea what time it was outside. For the first time since my captivity, I gave myself the go-ahead to think about my family. The ransom message would have reached my parents by this point. Have they already paid out the money? That evening, I was positive I had made the evening news. I imagined my younger siblings, and I must be afraid. I had to find a way out of this situation for their sake and for my parents' sake. That night, I felt the worst I'd ever felt. That felt like it went on forever. I made an effort to focus on happy thoughts while covering myself with the wool blanket to stay warm. I had an image of my warm, cozy bed from home, replete with a plush mattress and plush pillows. I would never take anything for granted once more if I ever made it out of here alive. I also pondered my younger siblings who still lived at home. I had never missed them in my entire life, despite the fact that they periodically angered me by stealing my possessions without my permission. I tried my hardest to see them once more. And I paid close attention, but I was unable to hear any sounds that might have come from outside. I decided to give up on attempting to get any sleep the next morning. I stood up and curled up in the room's corner with the blanket enclosing me tightly. Suddenly, shouts from outside the room could be heard. As I heard the boom, I assumed a helicopter was flying overhead. While my heart beat, my chest grew larger. At the sight, there must be police. The door to the room I was being held in slid open and one of the men in black hauled me outside. He took me to a big window so people could see me from the street. I spun around to see dozens of SWAT officers standing with their guns drawn. I could hear one of the males screaming. When gunfire started to ring out, I dove since I couldn't tell where they were coming from. Most of my prisoners broke free, and the SWAT team broke into the house. After two of them assisted me in reaching safety, I eventually reunited with my family. All of the people involved, including my kidnappers, were found and charged. They were a former business associate of my father's, and they had decided to pursue revenge after losing money on a contract. I thank God every day that I was able to get to my family without incident. I'll never again take my family, my safety, or my luxurious life for granted. In this situation, what course of action would you have taken? Please follow, like, and leave comments. Sleep tight until then.